Welcome to the Plan to Eat Podcast, where I have conversations about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you save time in the kitchen, reduce your grocery bill, stress less about food, and delight in dinner time. Hello, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Plan to Eat Podcast. Today I have an interview with Andrea of the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. That is a podcast where her and her co-host talk about ancestral foods, ancestral eating, and kind of getting back to the basics of more traditional styles of cooking and preparing food. Andrea lives on a small family farm with her and her family in the Pacific Northwest, where they have a small garden. They raise some livestock to provide for their family. And we talk a lot today about the benefits of sourcing food more locally, whether you're able to grow it or raise it yourself or just get it from someone in your local community. We talk about the human connection that brings. We have such a beautiful conversation about creating relationships with the people in your community around food and how important those relationships can become in your life. We also talk quite a bit about Plan to Eat. Andrea recently started using Plan to Eat a few months ago and has really found it so beneficial for her style of cooking and the kind of the longer process of preparing food that can sometimes happen when you're doing this more ancestral cooking. If you're following nourishing tradition style recipes where you need to ferment foods or soak your grains, it's super helpful. Just planning ahead is super helpful for that. And Andrea talks about that and how she has started incorporating Plan to Eat in her process. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. I loved this conversation and I hope you enjoy. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we get started by you just saying who you are and what you do?
Who am I? Oh, man. It's such a good question.
Loaded question.
Loaded. Oh, but right now, who I am. I am mom and wife. I live on a little farm in the Northwest Cascade Mountains. And we just raise for ourselves and our families, as in like parents-in-law. And we have 3 kids, 1 on the way. And I co-host a podcast with my friend Allison, and it's called Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. And we just, we kind of like you. We talk about food.
Yeah.
And we talk about eating ancestrally and locally, those sorts of things. So, yeah, I guess that's me.
I love it. Have you always been kind of a small time farmer homesteader, or is that something you got into later as maybe you had kids or whatever?
Well, in my fantasy world as a child, I was a farmer. I created this entire world and a family of 12 children and wrote little books about them where I had all these animals, and my mom would buy eggs and I would take them out of the boxes and pile them in baskets, and she would buy milk and I'd pour it out of the container into a pitcher. And, I lived on the farm in my head. And my parents had a piece of property, with some land out back, and we spent most of our time playing outside. So in my head, I've always been a farmer, but I've never owned an animal until the day we moved out to property. Never had a dog, never had a cat.
Wow.
And then we moved out here, and within a matter of months, we had a lot of things. So yeah, it's only been 4 years that we've been husbanding animals, but really enjoying it. And I like to call it working backwards, where for the years leading up to having our own property, I would volunteer on farms or work on farms, work in CSAs, work for CSAs. I was in milk shares. I would go out and watch cows being milked. I would participate as much as I could in the process without owning it myself. And I've always been canning. I taught myself to can when I was like 13 or 14 years old. And so canning and learning how to preserve things and make things, so that my hope was, and this totally panned out. So if anybody's planning to have property, start your master's degree now. But I had the intent that when we got to property, I wouldn't be learning how to do the things so much as I'd be putting them into practice in my own property. And I knew that there would be enough of a learning curve coming with, ownership. And there definitely is a huge learning curve with being the person who's responsible for the purchasing of things and all the calling the shots and stuff like that. There's a big learning curve that comes with that. So not having to learn, how to make ricotta now that I have a cow type thing was helpful. So
I really like that as the philosophy, number one, because that makes the process feel a lot less intimidating to then, be the person who's doing all the things. But I also like it as an idea of maybe you're somebody who doesn't ever plan to have land, or you're not in an area where land is affordable, but this is where your job is or whatever, and realizing that there are ways that you can still be connected to the food that you're consuming, or learning about more like homesteading styles of living, right in your area. I think that's really cool.
And some of you listening have jobs that we need you to have that aren't farming jobs. We need, doctors and people who make cool apps. Like, we need these things, and farmers need customers. It's symbiotic all around. So not everybody's gonna have a farm, and that's okay, but everybody's a part of eating, so we're all a part of farming. And there's a lot. It always irritates me when I hear people say, oh, we live in the city, so we can't really get out of grocery stores. I'm like, are you serious? It's so much easier when you live in the city, because you don't have to worry about all the management aspects of the farm. You just have to show up and get your food from the farm. So I felt like it was easier when we lived in town. So no excuses.
Right. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the United States or other parts of the world, but here in Colorado, we have so much access to local beef, local milk.
You do. You're in a good spot.
Colorado is really amazing for that. So I feel really lucky.
Sometimes it's hidden. It's like the speakeasies or the, the stills in the mountain type thing. It's there. You just have to know where to look and who to talk to, and then start the conversation and sort of work your way into the family. I have always felt that whenever we move, even though we immediately embed ourselves in the food network, like two things. My husband was in the Navy, so whenever we would move, the first things we would do is find a church, find meat, find milk, and find eggs and veg. Because if you have those things, you can kind of springboard to a lot of other things. And so we would find those things very quickly. But I always felt like it really, when I would hit the 2-year mark, which usually with the military is when they're like, and it's time to go. But when I hit the 2-year mark, I would feel like I was embedded. I've networked through, I know someone who knows someone who knows someone. I'm in this inner circle. You have more access. You've been buying from someone long enough that they're like, hey, we're going to throw this away, but do you want it? Type thing,
right.
So that trust takes a while to establish. So being patient definitely helps.
Yeah, well, and there are so many resources on the internet nowadays for finding things in your area related to that. And I mean, I've talked to people on the podcast as well who humanely raise animals, and they also, a lot of them will still ship to places all over the country as well. So there are definitely options, even if it feels like it's not right in your backyard.
We have a lot of advantages now, and we might as well take advantage of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on your podcast, Ancestral Kitchen, you and your co-host talk a lot about ancestral eating. Can you talk about what some of the tenets are, or the main ideas of ancestral eating?
Yeah. So ancestral food is, well, the way that we talk about it is it's the food that goes way back.
Mm,
So food that has sustained humans for thousands of years. There's lots of things that come and go. They'll pop onto the scene for a short time and then they'll disappear. I think we've all fell for the acai berries. You know, like there, who hasn't been paleo for at least a little bit? Like we've we've seen things come and go, and sometimes it's really challenging to find what you feel like you would thrive the best on in terms of food, because it seems like the data and the science changes every time there's a new product to release.
mm.
And so you can, my dad always says, figures don't lie, but liars can figure, right? So you can make data say anything, and anybody can prove that any diet, oh, look, you can live on water and wafers or whatever. Any diet can be proven to be the thing. And so what we do is we go back and we see, well, how did people in all different regions of the world survive commonly for thousands of years? And there's things you find that are in every place where you find people. Some of those include, like you see fermented fish, for
Mm.
instance. The Romans had garum. There's just different types of, Scandinavian fermented fish. That's a weird one, but like that's everywhere. You see often soaked grains. You see there's different varieties of flatbreads that were popular everywhere. We've got tortillas, chapatis, naan breads, you name it. There's one in every continent. You see saturated fat from animals. You see vegetables being fermented, fruit seasonally eaten, not in copious quantities typically, honey, not everywhere, but some places. So there's just some things that you can find. And the Weston A. Price Foundation, I know that you're very familiar with them, and they've done a lot of good work documenting a lot of this. So if people
Mhm.
want to read more, they actually have a list of principles. And so you could read that if you wanted to get some more ideas. But there's just things that people have been doing for a really long time. And what we find is throughout most of history, everybody was starving to death all the time. And so they would find ways to make food as maximally nutritious as possible. So very nutrient dense, very digestible, very accessible. And what's even more interesting, especially with everybody talking about inflation and the cost of food, this is peasant food for the large part,
Mm.
very cheap type stuff. So things that farmers could grow on their own, things that people could collaborate with in a town and then dole out over a year or whatever. This isn't like this exotic French cuisine. It's very simple, soaked grains, very simple loaves, very delicious, nutritious foods.
Mm. Yeah, I'm interested when I think about this. You mentioned that, throughout time, people have needed to have like a surplus of food. There were times when people were starving
Mm.
for different reasons, famines and different things that happened. How does that work with modern society where we have a surplus of food basically all the time, right? Like we're
Right,
almost always in abundance. People very rarely have scarcity, at least in the same ways that they did hundreds of years ago.
right.
Like how does that work with these same ideas? I'm just imagining that there are some people who hear like, oh, saturated fat from animals, then they think like that's, maybe not good for you, or that's going to be too many calories. And
Mhm. Yeah, no, this is the big question, isn't it? I mean, what's weird is that we are chronically malnourished as
mm,
a Western society. So people are eating a lot of calories, but they're not getting what their body needs, and their body is pleading with them. And so they eat more. And then they have consequences which cause massive suffering. And so our diseases have gone from, being diseases of sanitation and starvation to diseases of opulence, really, and malnourishment. So people have insufficient nutrient stores in their bodies. They're struggling with things like pregnancy, and like we have a reduced fertility now, which is bizarre. That's a sign of health in a nation, but fertility is now a very intense subject, and it absolutely devastates my heart because I come from a big family. I have 7 siblings, and I know the joy that a family can bring, and I have my own family, and it just breaks my heart when I see people struggling with that. We have a shorter population than generations before, which is unheard of. For your population to start shrinking, that's a sign of poor health and malnourishment. And we have reduced lifespans and quality of life at the end of those lifespans as well. And what we see coming in to try and repair these fixes is insanely expensive therapeutics and pharmaceuticals. And on the one hand, when people are desperate and need help, then you want an answer to turn to. But on the other hand, what if the answer creates more problems? And then you cascade into another category of issues that then you need a new set of therapeutics and tools to deal with. And then you end up with what we have now, which is insanely expensive healthcare, a lot of money spent on healthcare, and a pharmaceutical industry that is the biggest industry in the globe, trillions of dollars per year, and people are not healthier. So you think, well, we have modern medicine, but then when you look at the massive biomarkers of health, like the fertility, the height, and the lifespan, you're like, so weird. We're getting worse and worse, even though we have more and more of the medicine. So it does make one wonder. So I don't subscribe to the belief that, we should all live in a hut in the woods. I love indoor plumbing. People are like, what's your favorite luxury in life? And I'm like, listen, indoor plumbing. But I think that what I believe we can do is take the best of both worlds. So what we moderns are really big fans of doing, and the Victorians did this too, and everybody's kind of into this, is we look at what happened before and we're like, yeah, no, gross. Everything new is good, everything old is bad. And what that can end up with is some big problems. So what I think we can do is take the best of both worlds. Like, hey, we can have indoor plumbing, and what if we also had some small farms and we bought animals from these small farms? Or you're moving your cattle from field to field. Maybe you're not a nomadic shepherd wandering across the hills, but you own your own property and you just manage the way your cattle roam across the hills by moving them with your convenient modern electric fencing that nobody had before now. You know what I mean? Like you're getting the moving pasture health and the ancestral health of the animals, but you can live in the same house with the precious indoor plumbing. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I guess I like to combine the things that we can learn from the ancestral foodways with the advantages that technology gives us today. And that would include, PVC pipes, electric fences, being able to generate, hydropower and run it through systems that can power convenient tools and things like that are good to use.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that perspective that there's a give and take with both of the things, but there are modern conveniences that are really nice, but then there are things that are kind of back to basics that we have kind of that maybe we've forgotten, and we need to actually do the thing and go back to the basics. Yeah, because it's like, even with modern medicine, not everything is bad, right? Like, it's great to be able
Mm-mm.
to put your arm in a cast when you break your arm and things like that. But potentially when we're thinking about your health, and you mentioned this, it's not just really about your lifespan, but about your health span and how
Mhm,
long, not just how long you're living, but how well you're living during those years. There are some
mhm,
basic elements that are maybe being left out in a lot of modern eating patterns, a lot of modern diets that previously were very well known and just accepted in, more ancient societies.
well, there was no way around them, and that's one of the things that we have to be cautious of now. For instance, with all the labels on things. So
Right.
your eggs are free range, vegetarian fed, humane level number 4, outdoor happy 5 square feet per bird, or something, like the list goes on all the biodynamic, organic, soy free, corn free, like all the labels you could put on food. What labels do is they replace a trusting relationship
Mm.
with somebody whose property you could see when you walk past it. So you can't see my farm anymore. So I have to tell you how good it is. Right. And then because you can't trust me, because words mean nothing in this society, I need to have a governing body that comes in and licenses me to say those words. And it just gets worse from there.
Mm.
So I think when if you were my neighbor and you were buying eggs from me, and you'd say, yeah, I've literally seen your chickens. I know. You don't need to tell me. Like, just put them in a basket. I don't need it to say on the box. I can trust you. But when you're going into fluorescent lit building and you're going to get out of a fluorescent lit refrigerator, and then you're going to go to self checkout and you're going to swipe it over a machine, and then you're going to put your card and you're going to walk out, like no human interaction happened. You have no idea. And you don't know if I paid to use the label that's not accurate. You don't know if outdoor access means there's a 5,000 chickens in a shed and they have a 1 square foot door at the end of it that no chicken ever goes through, that technically, legally qualifies as outdoor access. Like, you don't know. Bringing relationship back into the equation of food is, it's not usually listed on things where people talk about ancestral food, like saturated fat, fermented, cabbage. But I think it's absolutely integral and cannot be divorced from the ancestral food
Mm.
diet.
I love that. I have never really heard it put that way, but that is such a wonderful way of thinking about buying things locally, is having that trusting relationship with somebody. And we talk a lot about how food in general is a source of connection. We mostly talk about it as like,
Mhm.
you sit down for a meal with your family and it's a source of connection. It's a place where you can talk and bond and all of those things. But I've also really loved this idea of, before any of that ever happens, you're also creating connection with other people in your community, and you're having trusting relationships with people who are then providing that food and nourishment for your family when you go to sit around the table. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And the food as connection runs really deep. And I think even deeper than people know, because we've participated in a supermarket system for so long that eliminates connection other than what they can, put on a really cute flyer to
Mm.
make you feel like you're connected, or if they can hang a sign that says farmers market over the veggie section. I'm thinking right now, a list of names are running through my head, and the people who are the closest to me in my life, people whose births of their children I've been to, and they're coming to the birth of this children, people whose funeral for their child I've been to, people who have picked me up when I was having, a hard time, people who invited me into their home for Thanksgiving when my husband was deployed and I was living far away from home. Like, all those people I just mentioned came to me through food. Somebody I
Mm.
met because I was trying to find raw milk, somebody I met because I was looking for a bulk veggie buy. Like, those relationships. Like if I say food is connection, I don't just mean I met a farmer and we had a good chat, you know?
Mm,
I mean, I, these people, like, we're there for each other, you know?
yeah.
Like we have become, and they're not all farmers. Some of them are just people who are shopping at the same place as me or trying to find the same thing as me or in the same legal club as I was, you know? And we figured we just became friends. And I would not trade those for getting something a little bit cheaper at the supermarket or having a buy one get one coupon on Fridays. You know what I mean? Like that's life sustaining relationships, and it feels healthy and it feels good.
Yeah, even though you just said that not all of those people are farmers, it really makes me just think about what I would say a typical farming community does feel like. My extended family is from a farming area in Kansas, and
Mhm.
that's what it feels like when you go there.
Yeah,
Is like
yeah,
everybody is supporting everybody else. If you are having an issue, somebody's going to come over and help you with it. They're
yeah.
willing
Your
to
combine's broken, theirs isn't. You
totally,
know, you
yeah,
don't have this set of metric tools, they do. Like you actually need each other.
yeah, and they want to see you succeed.
Yeah, they're invested in you,
Yeah.
which is huge. And I feel like one of the harshest things of our environment is that we work so hard to eliminate needing each other.
Mm,
Like, oh, she just had a baby. Can I bring her a meal? No, she's going to get it delivered from Amazon. I'm like, just, it's fine. You know, like,
right.
what? No, where's the humanity? We just, we work ourselves out of needing each other. And then I think that that trickles hard up to our elders because, you know, we have all the services. Like, what is an elder's place in society anymore? Ooh, they'll just shove them into a home and then forget about them.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, they're an integral part because mom had to be making dinner, shall we say, or threshing or grinding flour. And so grandma was going to sit and hold the baby so that mom could do that,
Mm,
right? It's just like kind of a random example, but all that to say, grandma played a role. She wasn't just sitting there hoping that you would come and visit her in your
mm,
free time and check your watch every 10 minutes because it was so boring and it smelled so bad there and you just wanted to go do something else and not think about death all the time. Like let's bring our families back together even. And that's something that making real food actually does. Like my mom has been coming out helping me prepare for this upcoming baby, and I'm so I'm so loving being in the same state as my mom is now
mm.
while I'm pregnant, you know, because I get to have this experience. And so she comes out and she cooks and she freezes things while I do projects, clean stuff with the baby or whatever. And she could just be like, okay, well, when the baby's born, from my phone, I'm going to ship you like a meal from some restaurant or something. But
Right.
but because we want real food and we really are intentional about the ingredients and want to use the meat that we raised on our farm, et cetera, she's out here physically preparing it herself with my kids, you know, and there's all this relationship happening,
Yeah.
which she could avoid. And bless for the times when you don't have a good mom or somebody in your life that can help you and you don't need to starve to death because you can order something. Like I'm not saying that, like you said with the medicines, I'm not saying that's never going to have its place, but gosh, there's a lot of connection that can come with trying to pursue real food that you
Hmm.
can avoid.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking of just that scenario that you laid out that your mom is then cooking and preparing food with her grandchildren and
Right.
the knowledge that she's able to pass down to them. I was just talking with somebody recently about how much I value the multi-generational relationships that I have because you
Mm,
learn so much from people who are both older than you and younger than you. You know, like
yeah.
as a middle 30s adult, there's so much that I can learn from people who are in their 80s who have lived a lot more life than I have. And also a lot that I can learn from kids who are still so curious and creative and have not, been blocked by all of the things that I've been blocked by as an adult.
Right.
So So I love that aspect of that connection too, that, being able to pass that information along and them having that reciprocal relationship of her getting a lot of life from your young children, as well as her passing along knowledge to them. That's so wonderful.
Yeah. And the opposite end of the spectrum, talking about elders and their role in society, is the children that you just brought up. And children are often, I don't know how to say this without sounding just like awful, but they're created into a position in the family that where they don't feel needed, so they don't have meaningful work, or they're not given meaningful chores because we don't want to impinge on them, or they have too much homework or whatever. And children actually do need to feel needed, just like the elders do, just like you and I do. Everybody does. But we often forget about children in this equation. And of course, they're going to complain about doing chores. That's their job. They're a kid. But that's how they're going to learn the incredible habits and skills that will carry them through a lifetime of being a productive member of society. And when people say things like, oh, maybe the kids, when the baby's born, the kids could go here or there for a couple of days, I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know how the house would run without them. Like, they're so integral. They're such a part of our everyday workings. It's not like they're just appendages that hang around here that expect me to wait on them, which I'm not saying anybody else's kids are, but like, that's not what they are. They're very participating members of the household. And there just seems to be this idea that I do not think that the kids need to be babysitters or, slaves or something like that, but they do need to feel like they're participating in the house. And it's incredible how much that internal locus of self-confidence, they have all these programs out there to boost kids' self-confidence. And it's like, well, let them do something meaningful. That's how adults boost their confidence, not by somebody slapping them on the back, but by doing something and then seeing the reward of that and then thinking, well, geez, I can do that. I can do this other thing over here. So I feel like that's another part of the ancestral lifestyle. You said something about cooking for a long time or something, and kids love to help in the kitchen. Do we always love to have their help? No. but the payoff of training them is pretty incredible, because my kids have been preparing meals for us and all kinds of things, while I've been very sick in pregnancy. And that's actually part of what got me so excited about the app, was because so much of what I do lives in my head, or I stand there and watch them and say it, or it comes out of a cookbook like Nourishing Traditions or something, but we have the little tweak that our family does, but I've never written it down because I know what it is, and so it's never needed to write it down, But with your app, I felt like I'm taking it out of my brain and it's going into the app. My mom can open it on the computer. My kids can open it on the computer. My husband can open it on the computer. They can see my brain right there and make it exactly how I want it made. So that has been one of the most exciting things for me in terms of your app. And then the kids, is basically making it so that they can have that specificity of our recipes, not just in looking at a cookbook with me making mental adjustments that I just always do.
I love that. I feel honored, I guess is the right way to say it, to just know that Planty has helped you and your family in that sort of a way. And we hear from lots of people that, it does that same thing for them too. Just the easy access to the recipes that and love, or the recipes that you created from scratch, means a lot to people. Listening to your podcast a little bit, I learned that you maybe are not naturally a planner, particularly when it comes to meals. So I'm interested to hear a little bit about how you have worked to implement meal planning more in your life. I know a lot of people are what we would consider kind of like inconsistent planners. You do it for a little while, you get off the wagon, and
Uh-huh.
then take some effort to get back on. Do you have any ideas around that, of ways that you've tried to implement it in your life?
Well, desperation helps. So what was that? So, well, Rebecca, who I think you're going to be interviewing soon, I hope. And she has been my muse because I was watching how she sorted and organized her meals. And I actually asked her to do the episode with me because I I know I heard you talk about this. Someone else on your podcast, I can't remember her name. She works for you guys, but then she had a baby, so she was off work and you
Right.
interviewed her. And you both alluded to the fact that a lot of people say, oh, yeah, a baby was coming. And I realized, like, help, I need some organization. So that was me. And I asked Rebecca, could you sit down with me and just explain to me how you do it? I didn't know she used an app. I had never heard of you guys. I was just like, tell me, what do you do in Excel spreadsheet? Like, how does this work? And so she explained it in the episode on our podcast that you were talking about. And I was just shooketh. And I was like, yeah, I need to definitely do something. So then I started, I got onto your app right away. You have such a great referral program. So, and I really like the way you guys do business, I have to say. Very impressed with the not, automatically billing us and stuff like that. Like, it just feels like you want us to choose to use your product and enjoy it and not just be, I don't know, forced into it or something. like everything from Amazon is.
Right.
So I'm a slow person and I need to integrate changes and adapt to them carefully because I have actually my natural tendency is to go too fast and blow up and die. So I had to slowly start using the app. And so I started by cautiously putting in a few recipes, seeing how it felt, So, like all my recipes, it says something like the day before, get this out of the freezer, or put beans on to soak. Because if anybody's listening who utilizes ancestral food methods or Weston A. Price methods or whatever you want to call it, that you open Nourishing Traditions and it's like delicious recipe for cake. You're like, okay, this is great. Like, first mix the ingredients. You're like, okay, like 4 days later, and you're like, hold on, I need it today. So you can plug that in on the app that says, you're going to have to mix this up. And so then, 3 days before the day I want to eat the thing, oh, look, I have this little task where I need to do something. I just love that. That has been enormously helpful for the way we eat. And also because a lot of our stuff comes out of our own freezers. And so I'm not going to the store and buying meat that's like already been thawed out and put into a cooler. I'm getting like sometimes going on spelunking missions and digging it out of the bottom of a freezer. And so knowing ahead is really helpful. I also actually really like how you can drag and move things from day to day very quickly because sometimes I'm for sure that we're going to make this thing this day. And then we live off grid. And so we have solar power when we want electricity. And I might put something like muffins on one day, but then there's no sun and I don't want to run the oven and drain the batteries. So I can even check the weather and I'm like, let's bump it to tomorrow. It says it'll be sun. And that's really helpful, I think, because I can swap things around. And then you guys have this grocery list, right? So when you plug things into the app, everybody listening is nodding, then it gives you a list of all the ingredients in your grocery shop. And that's more of a pantry hunt thing for me. So I don't keep all our stores in the kitchen. They mostly live on big wooden shelves in our garage. So canned things and whatnot. Though with the app, then I just very conveniently can see, okay, I need to bring in 3 jars of tomatoes, and so I can bring in the things I need to have in advance, and then just tap, 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 and then go away off the list, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
It's so awesome. Or sometimes a recipe has an ingredient like it says lemon curd. So I know, oh, I need to make a batch of lemon curd for this recipe. What I'm really looking forward to using this for is being able to delegate from bed or a chair, because I'm very determined to actually rest this time postpartum, and to be able to look at the list. And if somebody says to me, "What can I do for you?" then I could say, as it happens, I need you to chop an onion because tomorrow, you know what I mean? Like, it's all on the list. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to hold it in my brain. And anybody who knows anything about dopamine and cortisol and ADHD or any of these sorts of things, that the less that you're holding on your brain, and like it's like having the tabs open, or like using up RAM, or whatever you want to say, if you want to use a machine sort of reference, but the less that you have holding open in your brain, the less your experience of stress, and the easier it is for you to function and still make decisions. Because if we aren't all dying of decision fatigue, I don't know what we're dying of, because there's about 1 billion decisions you have to make a day. And if you add to that, remembering every 10 minutes, you have to get this thing out for dinner, and you have to make dinner, and dinner's going to happen again, then it just doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought all of that up. We love to talk about brain drain and decision fatigue, because I think that's a really underappreciated benefit of meal planning overall. And
100%. 100%.
Yeah. And we like the philosophy. I can't remember what the author's name is, but there's a book called Getting Things Done. And the idea behind it is essentially like, get things out of your head and into a system that you trust, so that you don't have to keep them all in your head. Because I think, meal planning with pen and paper is perfectly fine, except for the fact that you leave your grocery list on the kitchen counter every single time you go to the grocery store. Or in order to remember what you've planned for dinner, you have to be at home, where it's listed on the refrigerator or in your calendar or something. So there's an aspect of having it in the digital format that's so helpful for that, because you always have your shopping list with you, because who goes anywhere without their cell phone? And that means you also have your meal plan with you, so that when, your kids are like, "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" you can open your app and be like, "Oh, actually, we're having this chicken parmesan," or whatever the thing is.
Which I feel so powerful when I do that.
Yeah.
When they
Ooh, I
ask
like
me, and
that.
I'm like,
Yeah.
let me check the app. I'm just like, flex.
Yes. Yeah.
I can actually tell you.
Yeah, it really does help you feel like a winner, like you won the week, when you're like, I know these things. I don't have to think about it anymore. And one of my favorite things that I've realized about meal planning and with having the app is that I forget what I meal planned, which is kind of amazing, because it is that idea of like, I have a system that I trust. And so I don't even have to remember what's on my meal plan for the week. I just need to open my app in the morning and remember, oh yeah, for dinner, we're having these fajitas, and cool. I'll make sure that I take the things out of the freezer for it. It's really, powerful was a great word, because it feels like a really powerful thing to be like, I'm so not stressed about dinner that I completely forgot what I planned.
Yeah. And did you hear Rebecca did that on the interview I did with her? I asked her, what are you having for dinner tonight? And she's like, I don't even remember. And then we recorded an after show for our Patreon podcast feed after that. And I told her, I kind of love that you forgot. Like, prominent product placement, because you didn't have to remember. She didn't have to hold it in her head, which is just, the brain drain that you said. Oh, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
So I'm really curious about, I guess, your kind of like your planning process and your recipes, because you have, meat and produce and everything that you have raised. And so I'm guessing you have a lot of bulk items at your house. And, this would be really applicable for somebody who, like myself, like I typically buy a half a cow or, after hunting season, we often have,
Mhm.
Fresh game meat. And so I have a lot of stores of food, and the planning process in that regard is a little backwards of what I think a lot of people do, which is they plan their
I
meals and then
agree.
they go to the grocery store, buy the things. But do you have tell me a little bit about your process of having the items and then creating your meal plan.
Yeah. Okay. So just to make sure I point everybody to when Rebecca interviews with you and or go listen to the episode on the Ancestral Kitchen podcast. She's been doing this long enough year over year that she actually can plan out her cuts based on her known meal plans.
Mm.
So I want to say I've only been using it since a couple months. So I haven't had the year over year experience that she's got. So I'm still doing it, like you said, a little bit in the reverse, where I have the freezer full of meat cuts and now I'm planning based on those.
Mm-hmm.
I already knew, oh, here's how much I want in the form of steaks. And here's how, I already kind of had an idea. So I'm still in the baby steps where I'm planning a week at a time. And Rebecca is doing a month at a time, which #goals, I'll get there. And one of the things she told me that tipped me off to what a good tool this would be for me is that she said, yeah, I can go back and see what we ate last March. And I was like, hold up. For people who eat seasonally, this is monumental because when you can just buy fresh strawberries any time of the year, it doesn't really matter so much. But when you're like, when did strawberries come in anyways? And you can look back and be like, okay, that's really helpful. And for me, we tend to do a lot of low power meals in the winter, like things that can put on the stove, literally on top of our wood stove or on top of our propane stove in the kitchen. Like our house looks normal, we have a normal house with outlets and things like that. There's not a lot of power behind it. We're in the Pacific Northwest where it's cloudy 13 months out of the year. So we have to take the solar power when we can get it. But then in the summer, I'm kind of the reverse of a lot of people because then in the summer, I'm like, it's like a bake, because I have more power. So being able to look back and see that is going to be really, really helpful from both the bulk buying and then the off-grid perspective. Because I'll be able to see what was working, what was power being allocated to, and our grains, 5-gallon buckets and chest freezers, I guess is what our garage looks like. So you're correct in your assessment. And so it is less of going to the grocery store and it's more of coordinating the meals around what we have. Now, what's weird, one of the weird things people run into when they start bulk buying stuff is that they end up with a lot of stuff that they don't like or that they don't want to eat. There's the rule in canning, only can foods that your family likes. And everyone's like, duh, it's not as simple as you think. And so being able to then plan your next bulk buys based on, oh my gosh, I just can't wait to be able to look back and see, oh, this is what we were eating. Looks like we're getting 50 pounds of millet, That's really, really helpful. So right now I've been plugging in I didn't sit down and batch load a ton of recipes. I'm just putting in recipes as I'm using them. So it's kind of like slowly trickling in. And for one, I'm finding that it's helping me use some new recipes, which is fun because I will think of the new recipe, but then I'll forget that it exists, when the actual eating time comes around. So I'm able to put new recipes on the menu and I plan out the week. I'm only planning a breakfast and a dinner, and then lunch is basically taking care of itself between leftovers and stuff like that. And I don't know why. I do not know why. When I wake up and I look and I see what I'm making for breakfast, it's like, oh, great. Like, that's it. There's no standing in the kitchen like, oh, okay, we could do scrambled eggs. We could do a casserole. You could do like, I don't know why that little thing is so significant, but it really is. It's that one more decision to not have to make. And I do also realize how repetitive our food is based on looking at what we eat. I'm like, oh, wow, it's actually pretty simple, which makes it easier to stock your pantry when you know, well, we could get those little jars of those little things, but realistically, they're not really like, we're probably not going to eat them.
I like that idea. And I really do appreciate you mentioning, Rebecca's idea of being able to look back at past years for meal planning, because I find I do that too, just simply for when you need some recipe inspiration, even, you are thinking like, oh, we're just eating the same meals over and over again. Like, what did I eat last year in June? So that I can just remember, like what were the things that we were enjoying so that I could make those again if I haven't made them, since last year. I think that's a really great idea. And I'll make sure that I link in the show notes to your interview with Rebecca so that everybody can give it a listen. Because it is. And she does give a lot of really great tips specifically related to Plan to Eat because she's used the app for so long.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of her life now,
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up your entire day. So before we go, do you just have any advice for someone who is new to ancestral food and ancestral eating and maybe wants to start incorporating it into their life? And just what kind of advice would you have for somebody like that?
I'll pick one thing that is interesting and fun and exciting and delicious to you and just work on that and make it part of your lifestyle and your habits. Don't try to do everything all at once.
I like that.
You don't have to. You don't have to do it all at once. So
That's really...
if bread lights you up, it's a great place to start. And if bread sounds like a nightmare, don't start with that. So that's about my best advice, I think.
I think that's great. I think that's really great because, like when I first started making bone broth or sauerkraut, those things felt really intimidating to me. And it wasn't until I kind of like got some reps in with it before I realized like, okay, this is totally doable and it's actually really easy. But from the outside looking in, it feels like I have no idea what I'm doing, or this is going to take an incredible amount of time. So that's really great advice.
You've driven there 100 times now. You can do it with your eyes closed.
Yes, exactly.
You know which stoplights take forever. You know where everybody's fast. You know where it gets clogged. Like, you just know.
Okay, well why don't you... Yeah, no, thank you for being here. This has been wonderful. Why don't you just tell everybody again what your podcast is and how they can connect with you online or learn more about what you're doing?
Okay, podcast is Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. Should be anywhere podcasts can be found. And I have an Instagram and a Hearth that I have not posted on it in many moons. So, just don't worry about social media. Just go into your kitchen and do something fun.
Oh, that's great advice. I like that. Well, thanks again for being on here with me. Yeah, this has been great.
This is fun. I really, really loving the app, loving the business behind it, loving the way it works, and loving your podcast too. You have so many good interviews on there. So
Thank you.
I'm super stoked that I found it.
Thanks.
Or I
that
think
means
Rebecca
a lot.
told me about it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. There are links in the description so that you can find the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast, as well as that specific episode with Rebecca Zip. I'm actually going to be taking a little break for the month of August, and we'll be back with some more episodes in September. So I hope you enjoy the end of your summer, and instead of seeing you in 2 weeks, I will see you in a month. Thanks for listening.